I am not. Okay. So when you first open up After Effects, you get this little home screen. It's the same thing that Premiere does, same thing that Photoshop does. Tries to give you a quick little tutorial right here out the gate. So it does have some really cool tiny things here. Like you can remove a car from a video, that sort of thing. Some really neat stuff right off the gate. But what we want to do is we want to go ahead and create a new project. This is that home screen, just like with Photoshop, just like with Premiere. It's that place where all of your previous projects will be located. It's where you can create new projects, you can see tutorials and do that sort of thing, all from right here. So I'm just going to say new project. And it actually won't do too much. It'll actually just get rid of that window and take you directly to what After Effects itself looks like. So what I'm going to do here is we have all of our main buttons up here at the top. So this is the home button. It just reopens that exact same thing that we just had open. I'm going to turn that off. We have our selection. This is the same selection tool as in Premiere, as in Photoshop. Same with the move tool, same thing. Does some stuff a little different. It allows you to move some stuff here on the timeline as well as in here once we get our composition made. Then we have all of our file buttons, same as with everything else. You can open projects, you can create new items. So you can do new projects, new folders, new Photoshop file, Cinema 4D if you're using 3D programs, that sort of thing. You can open projects, you can save, you can import, all sorts of stuff. So let's go ahead and just really quick, let's import that all together, and then we'll actually take a look at the Photoshop file to kind of give you an idea of what's about to happen in here. So what we're going to do, for those of you at home, if you get lost because you're still uploading or downloading, just let me know and I'll go back over it with you. I'm going to do this a couple of times. So I'm going to go import and file. You can also do multiple files, but you can also do file and select multiple items all at once. And then I'm just going to go to where my file is located. Which is on the server. This is my file. You can see behind the curtain. So I've got exercise 2. It's going to go here, and then I just want that one that says 4AE. Now, when you pull this up, there's a couple things you want to make sure you're checking, regardless of what type of footage you're going to be using. So you could be doing a movie file. You could be doing a Photoshop, you could be doing just an image or a GIF, anything like that. You want to double check a couple of things. First, if it is an image sequence, so if you've exported something from Maya or Blender or whatever program you're using, you can turn on Photoshop sequence and it'll sequence them based on numerical order at the correct frame rate. That's pretty nice. Currently though, it's importing as a footage. So if it was an image sequence or a video file, this would be perfect, but since it's not, it's a Photoshop file and we actually want to use layers to kind of get some depth in here. I'm actually going to change that to composition with retained layer size. And then I'm just going to hit import. When you do that, it'll ask you, are you sure? You want to make sure that they're editable. So it's the one that's defaulted. It's just like, hey, are you sure you want to import it this way? You want to be like, yeah, I do. This is what I want. Especially for this project that we'll be doing, and then just hit OK and let that get in to be imported. So what we're going to do all together today is something very similar to kind of what we did with project 1, but with a twist. Not responding. Okay, that's fine. You just think. You have a think. So over here in my Photoshop, this is the other file, the not for After Effects file that I told you guys you didn't have to download. So this is kind of like what you guys would have had with project 1. You have a whole bunch of layers in here. You have a whole bunch of color corrections, a whole bunch of things in here. You've got your original image, all that fun stuff. But really, for the project, the only things we need to see is this bag that's on the front table, the candle in here, because what we're going to be doing is crafting depth and motion with After Effects. So I'm cutting parts of my image similar to what we did in Project 1. But like I said, it's going to have a twist because we're going to make it move. So I have this bag, which is my object that'll be to the camera. I have my table with her arm on it because that's the next closest thing, right? Then we have the woman sitting behind that table. So she's also pretty close to us. Then we have this other woman in here. And then lastly, we have our background. So I have this one is called background fix. Pretty much what that means, if we're going to be making these characters move, so take this lady that's over here on this right side, right here. If I make her move her arm, when we move our arms, we don't have an extra piece of arm behind our arm when we move, so we have to remove that. So all that we've done here is we have used the clone tool, the healing spot tools, and all that sort of thing to just remove her arm. That way, if I make it move, she won't have two arms. Does that make sense for everyone? So you want to do that with every part of your image that you're going to make move. More on that in a bit. So pretty much, like I said, this is just like the image that you did with Photoshop Project 1. Now, the reason why I had you guys download the 4AE version is because I got rid of all of those extra layers that we don't actually need. Because what happens when you take your Photoshop into After Effects is it'll try to make every single item its own layer. And if you have all those extra stuff inside of your project, it gets a little hard to read, even if you have them labeled, because you'll have like color correction 1, 2, 8, and then you'll have layer 1, layer 2, layer 4, copy layer 8, background, that sort of thing. But with this 4AE file, I just have that background fixed, my woman standing, the woman sitting, that table, and the bag. Now, the reason why we do this, like I said, is because if we make them move, so maybe I want her to be like, I'm watching you. We can do that. We don't want to move her hand and then there be another hand. Same as if we move that lady backwards, like she's like offended, clutching her pearls there. If we make her move backwards, we don't want to accidentally see more of her head. Same if we want to make this candle kind of gutter a bit, we don't want to see other parts of the flame while we move it. So, since we are here and we've imported those layers and that file in here, you can see that it automatically makes a composition right here. So it's that Matthias Stromer authentication painting AE. It shortens it really short. It's got those dotted lines in the middle, so you can kind of make sure that it's the right image that you've got in here. But it's also got this Matthias layers. If you open this up, you can kind of get a little tiny view of your layer here. So you can always double check to make sure the right layer is named the correct thing. Just by clicking on those once and kind of like rubbing through those, you can get an idea of which one is what. So you can see on here that it's labeled for like this bag on table, it's bag on table dash that painting dot PSD. So you can kind of make sure that everything is the exact file that you need. Does anyone have a question up to here? Yeah.
So like the layer options, we're doing the choose layer thing.
Oh, so you. No, it's okay. Anyone else have a question up to this point? Anyone remote have a question? I'm gonna assume it's a no, unless someone starts tapping in the chat. Okay, so what we're gonna do from here is we're going to minimize this little layers here. We don't need that. Take that back down. And see where it says composition here? I'm just gonna drag this one that says composition with a click and drag of my mouse down into our timeline. Now this entire lower half here is our timeline. Now, when you drag that down, it'll automatically make another composition that's the exact same one. So you can also double click on it. So double clicking is a bit faster. You can also drag it down. But you just want to make sure that you're getting all of these layers visible here, like so. Sometimes if you drag down, I went one too far. That's fine. That's fine. Sometimes when you drag down, it'll drag the composition in as a pre-composition. So it's already comped into that composition. This is really handy if you've got a really large After Effects file, like something we might have for the final. So you can also double click into that and it'll open it up. But I'm just going to double click on this top one here. So we just want to be able to see all of those layers in there. You can also manually drag each layer down into your composition and scale them and to match the actual scale of your composition, but this is faster. Can you all agree that it would be a little tedious to manually drag each one down into your composition, try to scale it and get it all fit? This is just nice and quick. So now that we have something in here, again, nothing's moving yet. We have other buttons we can look at. Zooming should automatically be zoomed with the scroll wheel. That's nice. You can also zoom in and out of your timeline down here with this little mountain peak. So the bigger mountains is closer, far off mountains is, smaller, larger. So zoomed in, zoomed out. We also have our zoom button here. So you can just click and drag and it'll zoom you in on certain things. Holding Alt with this tool will reverse it. Should we need to rotate anything, we can't just manually rotate something. We have to use the tool for it. So we can rotate her if we had to with the rotate tool. We can use the selection tool to manually move her. We can create shapes with the rectangle tool. It also will create a mask if you have a layer selected. We'll talk more about masks in another class. You won't have to worry about making them here. We also have the pen tool. It works the exact same way. You can make shapes or you can make masks. An idea of what a mask does. Give me this. Is if I move it, you'll see she disappears. It's just cutting her out of the frame, masking her away. We also have a text tool right here. We have a brush tool. So if you needed to paint something out for whatever reason, you can manually do that. We have a stamp tool. Clone stamp tool works the exact same way. Let's say you have something that you're tracking. So maybe you want to remove the sign from a car. You can paint that out. You can clone it out. And then if you track it, it'll follow your car. Same with the eraser tool. If you need to erase anything that you've painted or cloned, you can do that. We also have the roto brush tool. It kind of does it at the same time. It's a really neat little tool. But the one we're mostly going to be using is this tool right here called the puppet tool. Now, before we start playing with it too much, there is a couple things you need to know. When you are creating for this project, so we're going to be starting project 2 today. It's exciting. When you're making your Photoshop composition of whatever you want to pick, whether you pick one image that's already been made, so I have some examples that I'll show you. If you have one that you're like, hey, I really like this picture, I want to cut it all up, maybe I want to add like an extra character to it, you really want to make sure that before you even start, your canvas size is really large. So you can see this one is massive. I made this one super massive on purpose. You want a minimum of that 16 by 9, 200 DPI. Making it super duper large is much easier than making it super duper small. If you make it super small, it'll be really hard for you to actually get the animations to look right. It'll be a little hard for you to work inside of After Effects. So when you do come in here, you do want to make sure when you go into composition, when you bring this composition in, you come down here to composition, go to your composition settings, and make sure that this here is set to the correct size. So right now mine's really large. I'm just going to change that to 1080. And you'll see it gets really small. But for right now, I'm going to leave this here. So before you start bringing stuff in, just make sure you're at that 16 by 9 by 200. So other things you can check inside this composition settings is everything that can happen when you create a new composition. So you can change what type of video you're using. So you can come down here if you're like, I'm not really sure if it's 1080 that I need to use or anything like that, or the frame rate. I know I can come down here to HDV 1080, 25 frames, or HD TV 24. So again, it'll get nice and small. So my frame rate is 24 frames a second. I've got that nice aspect ratio here. And I'm just going to click OK. And then I'm just going to highlight all of these, click on a corner, and zoom them in. So again, you still might have to play around with some size if it's super duper large and not that 16 by 9 by 200. If your Photoshop is already that 16 by 9 by 200, you won't have to scale anything at all. So right now I'm just going to leave this really massive. I'm not going to be exporting it. So just be aware of that. If it's really large, you might have to scale some stuff down inside of After Effects.
It's about 200 DPI, right?
Yes, 16 inches by 9 inches by 200 DPI. Does anyone have a question on that at all? With the getting it in here about making sure your size is right.
What type of composition was this going at?
So when you go to composition settings, you want to make sure that your preset that you're using is one of the HD TV 1080, 24, 25, or 29. For this class, I would prefer 24 or 29. 24 is a little bit more natural, 29 is just a bit faster. But like I said, if inside your Photoshop file it's already that smaller size, you won't have to worry about this at all. 24. 24 or 29.97. Yes. Now, other things you can change in here is the duration. So currently I have 29 seconds with 29 milliseconds. You can change that to be shorter or longer. You can also change that with this little end nub right here, this little blue line. You can click that and drag it into a certain second I'll be doing that in just a moment. But something else you can do that might help, since we're working with a lot of transparency. Currently my background here is black because that's the default color, but also my background behind my image is black. If you know you're going to be working with some transparency things and you're like, I think my background might get seen a little bit, you want to make sure you're not doing something that's like a weird, like pastel pink if you don't have any pink in your entire composition. I like leaving mine either black or white or a really nice green or blue. That's all personal preference, but I know with this painting right here, if some of my background is shown, if I have a black background color, no one will never know the difference. Easiest way to resize while keeping proportions is a question. If you click on it and scale it in, if you hold down Shift, it'll keep your proportion.
Well, we should keep proportions.
Yes. So it works the opposite of Photoshop. It used to work just like how Photoshop used to. So now if I'm just clicking and dragging, it won't scale with proportion. So you can see I'm really big. If I hold down Shift, it'll always lock that proportion, so it'll be the same size. Question?
So when I changed it to the HD TV 24, obviously the image is now a lot bigger than the actual frame.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm trying to scale the image back down into the frame, I'm not having a lot of success with keeping everything.
Yeah, so you'll do it. This I said for this example. Yeah, so there is no way to select all of them, Kelly. You have to do them one at a time. So for this example, you don't have to scale anything down. You can leave it at that really large size. Just be aware that when you're doing your project, you want to go ahead and have it at that 16 by 9 by 200. Yeah, no, you're good. Okay. Now, so down here in your timeline composition, there's a whole bunch of buttons to see and play with. So first off, just for example, I'm going to hide some of my layers. So I'm going to turn the little eye off just like I would with Photoshop. So I'm just going to leave it so this one woman that's making a rude gesture at this other woman, I'm going to leave her visible. So next we have sound. So if you have audio on a video or something like that and you're like, I really don't want to hear any audio, you can toggle this off and on by clicking on that one. The next is the solo view. So it'll solo that. So it'll kind of isolate that one layer. This is another way if you're like, I don't want to turn everything off because I have a whole bunch of layers. I just want to see this one for a minute. You can click that solo button and it will solo it. So you see I turn that back off, everything pops back on. So I'm going to keep soloing her for just a moment. Next we have our lock. This lock will lock your layer so that you can't change it. So if I click that little lock there, I can expand her. I can open up her transform, but I can't change anything in here. It kind of flashes and yells at me. So I'm going to turn that back off. Next we have our little shy object here. It's this little button right here. I think it looks like Squidward to me. Kind of like making a face. But what it does, it'll hide your layer on the timeline when you play. So if I turn this off, like she's still there, but if she wasn't highlighted here, all my animation would kind of fade off for a bit. We have our quality. So if you're working in here and something seems like the quality isn't working quite well, play around with these. Sometimes you'll get a better result if you click on this. You can see how like kind of along her edges here, I get a little bit of change based on which one I've clicked. So she kind of gets a little softer on this normal one. a little bit more crisp on the second, and even crisper on the third. This is just your sampling, your anti-aliasing, to make sure that everything is as clear as you want it to be. Let's see, you can turn off and on effects with the little FX button. That's pretty standard. If you need to turn, like if you've got a color correction or a roto or a mask or something on a layer and you're like, I think I've messed something up here, you can turn that off and it'll turn all your effects off, and you won't have to worry about that at all. This next one with the couple circles is your motion blur. So if you have an animation, it'll make it appear more realistic by adding a bit of blur to the motion. This one should look a little familiar. It's the same adjustment layer symbol as from Photoshop. So if you have an adjustment layer turned on, you can turn that off and on. So you can see she turns off because it now thinks she's an adjustment. She's not.
What is the adjustment?
It works the same way as in Photoshop. All those like the layers, vibrance, things like that. It'll toggle that as a layer for that. And then this cube layer is our 3D layer. And I'm going to go ahead and on all of these turn that on. Now, when we're working with what we're going to be working with, if you don't have 3D on, sometimes you can get some weird results. So I just like to preemptively turn those on at the start. What this allows you to do, I'm going to turn some stuff on. So with that turned off on this layer, you can see my position, scale, and rotation are only in X and Y. So I can only move right, left, up, down. If I turn that on, she can now move in X, Y, and Z. So she can go forward, backwards, right, left, up, down, A, B, start. So go ahead and make sure all of those are on because we'll be playing with that in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to re-solo our lady here, and I'm going to zoom in a bit. So what we're going to be using is called the puppet tool. Again, it's this little pin up here. It's the pin puppet tool. You'll hear me call it the puppet tool or the pin tool. It's both. It does the same thing. Sometimes it's just the names change when I open this up. So this year, I think it is the puppet position pin tool. Last year, it was the puppet pin tool. Year before that, it was just the pin tool. The year before that, it was just the puppet tool. So it's always a combination of that, but it's always this little push pin looking button. Now, how this works, I'm going to give that a click. Is it will create and allow you to create animations based on where you've put your pins and how you keyframe your layer here. So I'm just going to put one on her elbow, and it'll automatically take her layer and create a mesh of that layer. Now, it's not like a 3D mesh, but it's something very similar, so you can think of it in that way. And what will happen is you can see when I hover over this little pin that I've put in her, I get an arrow with a move-like symbol like that we used to have in Photoshop. And when I move that, her whole body moves, which is cool. We can now move her around. How this works is the more pins you have inside of your mesh, the more points you can move at any given point. So for instance, if I put one at the tip of her fingers here, I can now move her from her hand, but her elbow does not move. So if I put one on her forehead, her nose, and her chin, and then move her hand, only her hand moves. Now she can watch the other woman. So if I add even more pins, so maybe I want to put one at her shoulder, other shoulder, and maybe like her high waist, we get a lot more natural motion, right? So that's pretty cool. So in here, when you made that first pin, It automatically inside of this layer created an effect. So yours might look like this right now. So you had her selected. Anytime we're working with inside of After Effects, you want to make sure that your layer that you are working on is selected and open. And that's just by clicking this little drop down arrow here. So when you first open it up, it might look something like this. Material options, this is everything about how your image here appears. So do you want it to cast shadows? Do you want it to accept light? Do you want it to be a little bit more diffuse, ambient, things like that? For this exact layer, we're not going to touch that too much, but just be aware it's there. So if she's not casting shadows or accepting shadows for some reason, you can toggle those off and on. We then have our transform. This is our scale, our position, our anchor point, kind of like what we did in the double identity a little bit. We looked at those inside of Premiere. It works the exact same way here inside of After Effects. The only difference is we have this orientation, our rotations, and opacity. Excuse me. This opacity here will allow you to make her more visible, less visible, that sort of thing. You can rotate her 360 degrees in all directions.
She's a plane.
She is a plane. You can also orient her all at the same time. So if you needed her to start out in one position, then you can then go in and rotate her even further. You can also scale in all positions, or you can break this link and only do one. And then again, she's already in her position, and her anchor point is that little crosshair in the center. Should I need to move that anchor point at any point, it will automatically shift her. It won't shift the anchor point. But what we really want to look at is this effects section right here. So we have Puppet. That is the tool that we used. If you have a different effect, maybe you have a color correction or some other type of effect in here, it'll pop up here. So we have our Puppet engine. This is advanced. There's also Legacy. It works a little different, but it works pretty similar. So if you want to play around with the Legacy version, maybe there's something going on inside of your Puppet that's just not working right, you can change that to Legacy to see if it might fix it. We have the rotation refinement. What this means is it'll be like, hey, if I move this, is there any number in here that might make it look a little nicer? I've found with this project, you don't really need to change that too much, if at all. But if you are having some weird rotation problems when we have rotation turned on, take a look at that, it might fix it. On transparent, is it transparent or not? I like to leave that at default. If you get some weird anti-aliasing or something looks a bit weird, you can try turning that on, it might fix it. And then we have our mesh and compositing options. Compositing options, you want to make sure you leave that alone. It's pretty much just the opacity of the object. Unless you're going to be changing anything in that, leave that one be. But what we're looking for is this mesh one. So like I said earlier, when you create a puppet pin, it automatically creates a mesh. You can change the density of that mesh. So if she's moving too much, I can up that a little bit. You can see she moves a little less in her arm here. If you need her to move more, you can take it down. So now you can see there's more of her chest is moving. Less motion. So if it's wiggling a little too much, you can play with that a bit. And it should fix that. Same with the expansion. If you find that you need more motion, funky. If you need a little less motion, you can change that expansion. Then we have our deform. So these are all of our puppet pins themselves. This is where all of your keyframes on your pins will be located. So I know I'm mostly going to be animating this pin number 2 here. So I'll open up that pin. And you'll see it automatically set a keyframe on whatever frame on our timeline I'm currently at. So when I created my puppet pin tool, I was somewhere between 2 and 4 seconds. You really want to be paying attention to that because you don't want to make too many keyframes on top of each other. You don't want to overwrite a keyframe, but you also don't want to make a keyframe in a weird spot. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this one in its place, but I'm going to go all the way back to 0. And I'm going to move her pin tool so she's a little bit lower, like so. Now you'll see I'll get a bit of deformation here. That's okay, we'll fix that in a minute. But you'll see, since this little stopwatch here is blue, it automatically keyframed that animation. So if I scrub through on my timeline, her arm will move. Questions about this so far? Just to make sure everyone's with me. I will do that again. So whenever you create a pen tool, it automatically sets a keyframe. You can tell it's got a keyframe because it's got this little diamond here that's blue. You can also tell that you're keyframing because your stopwatch is blue. If I were to turn that off, my keyframe goes away. So I could reset that if I needed to. I'm going to undo that though because I want that keyframe there. But if I want to set another keyframe, I need to make sure on my timeline here, my little arrow blue line is where I want that new keyframe to be. And then I can animate my arm to be in a different spot. So if I want her arm to go about this far and then come back up to where it normally sits, I can move that. And so long as I've got my timeline on a different spot, it'll make it a keyframe on a new spot. But it can also overwrite old keyframes if you accidentally move something, so just be aware.
So wait, when you create the pin or when you move the pin?
So when you create the pin, it makes your first one.
Okay.
When you move the pin, it makes another. And so long as that stopwatch is on, it'll keep making pins. So if I'm like further closer to her face, I want to make another, I can do that.
Where's stopwatch?
Right here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little low. It's like right here.
Stopwatch.
Here, I'll move it up a little. Yep.
And drop down.
Yep.
That's in the deform menu?
Yes. So it goes your layer, effects, puppet, mesh, deform, the individual puppet pin, and then you have your keyframes. Okay, Brooke, you're good.
Can you see that one more time?
Yes. So to get to those keyframes, it's your layer, effects, puppet, your mesh, deform, and then your actual puppet pin tool that you placed. Now I'm going to minimize and make this a little smaller so you can see when I hover over this like blue thick bar. So like there's this one right here, but on the far side. If you hover over that, it'll say like work end or something to that degree. If you click on that, you can drag it in and it'll shorten your overall animation. So I'm just going to take mine down to 6 seconds. And I'm just going to zoom in a bit.
You're just doing the scroll wheel?
Right here on the bottom, those little mountains at the very bottom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just to make it so it's a little easier for you guys to see my keyframes. So something that we want to look at here is not only can we place these keyframes, but we can also change how they interact with the motion based off of the graph editor. If you have played with the graph editor in Maya yet, is there anyone that's done that at all yet? Have y'all touched it a little?
Yeah, we've used it.
Cool. A little bit. So it's similar. If you have any experience in that, it's quite close. So you have these little tangent points, just like you have in Maya. So you can actually move those around and get different animations. based off how those tangents work. To break those, you can hold down Alt, and it'll move them a little bit, but you can only move them one at a time. Kind of similar to Maya, you can only really move one at a time, but you can only break them at one at a time as well. Whereas with Maya, you can break both points at the same time. You can also click this little button here, which will enable you to look at it inside the graph editor. So there is an actual graph editor inside of After Effects, and it's this button right here. Is labeled the graph editor, kind of looks like a graph located right next to your 0, 0, 0 point. And when you open that up, you get your actual graph, so you can actually move things around manually in here. And it's just a standard graph editor. It works pretty much the exact same way as Maya's does. The buttons are just a little different. The buttons are down here and not up here like in Maya. And to turn that off, you just re-click that graph editor and it'll take you back to your normal timeline. Your lines don't look nearly as smooth. That's okay. That's okay. Takes practice. And Brooke, that's okay about your audio. I'm not going to be grading the audio at all. Question?
I don't know what I just did.
You don't know what you just did. That is
Now
very.
there's text on my timeline now, and I don't know where it came from.
Oh, you have activated the code.
I did not know.
Good job, Lucy. So that's your actual code. Pretty much there's a code editor inside your layers. So if you want to write some code, you can do that.
That could be fun.
Yeah. There's a couple of expressions that you can do in here that are really fun. There's also some default ones. So like you can just like click it and it'll like tell you which ones you can do. We won't be touching that in this class. So you don't have to worry about writing code in here. That's a later class. Okay, so other things you can do with the pen tool. So let's say on this one right here, at her elbow, that weird bend in her arm doesn't look natural, right? So I'm going to make sure I'm on my first keyframe right here. And I'm just going to minimize my second pen tool and open up my first pen tool, because remember that pen tool is the one that this one is. It's the one that's selected, not the other one. You can tell which pen is selected based on which one is highlighted here. So this one is all yellow, so it's my pen 1. When I click on this one, it's all yellow, and you can see it highlights my pen 2. So when you are creating your keyframes, just make sure you're using the correct pen when you are doing this. So I'm going to go down here to pen 1. And in here, you'll see it as position. You can change those to start, bend, and advanced. Start is the exact thing that you think it is. It makes it hard to move. It won't do anything. It's static. If I move this one, you'll see it moves, but it doesn't move like too terribly much. It's more starchy. There's bend, so it will rotate and bend. So if I have, on this keyframe, if I know I need to rotate that a bit to make sure her bone doesn't look weird, I can do that. However, now it looks like her forearm is way too long, right? So you can also go to advanced, which will also let you change the position. So if I know I need to move her position of her elbow, whoop, wrong one. forward a bit, there we go, you can do that to make it look a bit more natural. So just be aware that there are different types of movements you can do in here. So position, that moves your actual position of your pen. Your start won't allow you to change anything. It just says that you have a pin there. It kind of makes it a little harder to move. So you can see if I click here, I can't move it. But if I move a pin that's around it, it will move around. Bend is the rotation and scale. So if I click this little guy here, it'll scale her arm out. And then I can rotate her. And the advanced is all of it. You can move her by moving that little dot in the center. You can rotate it with the rotation, and you can scale her up or down as needed. Does anyone have any questions about the puppet tool itself? Everyone doing okay remote? Questions in here?
Where's the button to open it again? Never mind, I found it.
Okay. So go ahead, take like 2 minutes and keyframe her to just move her arm. And then when you're ready to play it to make sure everything works right, there is a little section over here on the right that says preview. Just hit play. You can also hit the space bar. And if anyone has any questions, just let me know. It's a bit less intuitive than mine, but it works about the same.
Oh. Sorry.
I didn't spoon food, like, or this cushy or nothing, whatever you want to call it.
It's all right.
All these days have been almost scary.
You probably won't have to try it.
I'm going right behind. Funny enough,
That might not get me. Okay. And be more people. What exactly do you use with the other?
You can use the advanced to rotate. How do you delete keyframes? There's a couple ways you can delete keyframes. So let's say on this pin 3 here, which is her head, I wanted to delete her keyframe right here. You can click on the keyframe and hit the delete key if there's just one that you want to delete. But if you want to delete all of them, you can undo the stopwatch and just make it so it's no longer blue. And then when you're ready to recreate your keyframes, you can just return that on.
Like, do we click the name?
To delete keyframes, you can select the individual one and hit delete. Or if you need to delete an entire row of keyframes, you can turn off your stopwatch and then turn it back on to recreate keyframes. You can also move keyframes by clicking and dragging it on your timeline. You can do a whole bunch of keyframes. So if I go to my puppet pin tool, that's number 2, and I'm like, hey, on this, I want it to make them happen a little later in time. You can highlight them all by clicking and dragging like your board on your desktop, and then clicking and dragging them around. You can also do that with just 2 of them. So long as you can see them as a diamond, you can move them around. Your keyframes won't highlight. Make sure that they aren't little dots. If they're little dots, you'll have to open up your puppet, because you can only move them if they are the little diamond shape. You have to have it open. Did that help, Kelly? You just want to make sure that the puppet that you're trying to delete or move is open. So you said your keyframes won't highlight. So let's say I minimize all these. So I have all these keyframes right here. I can't click and drag on them. To actually be able to select them, you'll have to open up each individual puppet tool, and then you'll be able to click and drag over them and they'll turn blue. Instead of being like these little circle dots, they'll be like little diamonds. Does that help? Awesome, cool.
How do you make the movement again?
The movement? Like the move the keyframes or just the movement?
Like, I don't know, when you select on like the hand, you got like a little, like, bent arrow.
Oh, okay. So go to your layer. So it's that pen tool 2. So puppet pen 2 all the way down to the bottom. So open that up. So now you're on frame 1. So move to your next keyframe location, which is like 2 seconds. So move out on the timeline. So move out to like the next like 2 seconds. So now click and drag your pen. New spot. So you're trying to get the elbow to move now.
No, I'm just trying to remember how to actually do it.
Oh, yeah. Then that's all you got to do. You just got to make sure you're different on the timeline. You got it. Oh, you're too far past. You can drag it back into your import. with a little X. Yeah, just close it all. It won't get in. Close this one. Double click on the for B. Because normally I would just tell you like close it and reopen it. And that normally fixes most
Yeah,
issues.
I had close to, as I wanted to end it.
My camera looks like she's like trying to seduce the lady by pushing back her hair. Her two fingers. Then
That's okay.
that's okay, because like I don't know why the hand is flipping behind her.
Yeah, mine does that as well.
Okay. She's seducing.
I've had people do like by watching you. I have to like flip her off. It's whatever motion that you think her
I guess
hand.
you could erase the other finger and have it be.
Yeah. Your arm keeps warping. When you are in here, Kelly, so yours kind of does something, so your motion kind of moves like this, but her arm's warping, it's like kind of bending in half. What you want to do is on this elbow one, you want to make sure it is set to this advanced here. So you can change its position, its scale, and rotation. That way you can, because what yours probably looks like right now, something like that, right? You want to be able to keyframe it to roll a bit. To kind of follow that hand a bit. Now, once you guys get her done, go ahead and turn on all the other layers. So you can unsolo if you have it soloed, or you can just manually turn it on. And then what you want to do is go ahead and animate either her to lean back, or if you want to be a little bit more advanced, you can animate this candle to kind of gutter a little bit like it's on fire once you've got the arm done. So for instance, for the lady, train, thank you for joining the lecture today. Every day, same time. So for instance, with this lady, since this other woman is like, hello, you can either have her lean forward. I'm going to have her lean back a bit. So I have all my keyframes set on this first one. So if I go down here to my deform, you can see all of my keyframes are these little dots. I can't currently select any of them. I'm just going to move forward to about the end of this motion here. I'm just going to lean her back a bit. Just a nice subtle, oh no. I'm going to make sure I leave her elbow where it is, because if I move it too much, her arm's going to look like it broke in half. And I can't move this one too much or her cloth will be visible. So for these two down here, I'm going to make sure that they're starched, because I don't want to be able to move them at all. They're nice and static. You can also leave them just as positioned so they won't move at all.
I'm good. I do and just restart it.
Hmm?
I think I'm gonna stay what I do and restart it. I'll be up like slowing out.
You can.
We're fiddling around with this stuff.
Yeah, this isn't a, you're not gonna be turning this in.
Yeah, that's what I would assume.
So we're gonna have like just that creative liberty with this that we have with the Photoshop thing.
So you will still have creative liberty.
Wow.
I will show you some fun examples.
I will meme
This is
this.
project 2, right?
This is project 2.
This will be a meme project.
You would not be the first
Or the last.
or the last.
Memes are what keeps the world going in times of trouble.
If it keeps you sane, that's fine. Kelly, when you're making your keyframes, make sure, since I can't see your computer right now, make sure that when you're changing where they are located, you're moving on the timeline as well. The main thing that might be happening is you have your time slider here in the same spot, and you're not moving it before you move where she is located. So like, for instance, this woman standing here, I have her puppets. For instance, on her puppet 9 here, which is her, oh, excuse me, her torso. If I create a pin here, or a keyframe here, if I don't move my timeline, but I move her, it won't actually do anything. It'll just have her moved. So just be aware that that might be, yeah, blue time clock. Now, if you ever, I'll be there in just 1 second. If you ever do set a keyframe and it doesn't actually set a keyframe, even though your time clock is blue, you can click this little add or remove keyframe button at current time slot. It's the little empty diamond. It'll automatically add or remove a keyframe if your time slider is over top of it. Just in case you might.
I got the play button to work, but I'm now missing the lights again.
Oh, double click on the thing. Open it. Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was.
My screen is weird now. First of all, there's that, I don't know where that came from. And if I try to put like a couple of things down.
Yeah, so stars will still move. Yeah, you just won't be able to. So it kind of like says, hey, don't move it as, like you can't move it yourself, but others can.
Well, I mean, but it's like I'm trying to get her to bend, so why is it going like?
I think you just need to have one.
So I was like, oh my gosh, why is it moving the entire thing?
Yeah, starch just kind of means like you can't move it, but others can move it around it. It's just a little bit starchier, so it's a little bit harder to move. so much more difficult than it looks.
How do I get the line to let me change the curves again?
The lines to be changed to curves.
Yeah.
That's hard.
I just meant like for point the line you could adjust.
Oh, make sure you have that layer selected on that puppet pen. Yeah, so like, oh, so make sure you have the pen tool selected. So scroll down. So click your puppet pen.
Yeah.
Just the same thing, it's here instead of here.
They wanted more of it afterwards.
So you just got to kind of go back and forth. So you might have to add more. Okay, so one other thing we're gonna do really quick, and then I'll give you guys your project too, give you some examples and let you go do what you want to do today. Maybe cuddle a puppy, eat some lunch, something along those lines. So what we need to do now is we have our motion. So for me, I have a little bit of motion here on the candle. I have her arm moving. She's leaning back all offended. Now what I want to do is put them into 3D space so that they'll actually move and have a look like they're actually in 3D space, and even have a camera that kind of moves in toward them a little bit. A nice virtual camera. So what we're going to do is we have our 3D layers already on here, so we can actually move them in 3D space. But currently we're only seeing them from just the front view. We're seeing them just head on. So there's a little button right here called One View. I'm going to change that to 2 views horizontal. You can also choose 2 views vertical if you'd rather see them on top of each other. I personally like seeing them side by side. So I'm going to do 2 views vertical. So now I have what it looks like from my top view. So I have here and I have here. So I know my background I'm gonna also make sure I'm in my selection tool here. I don't want to accidentally create a puppet tool on my background. Is my background is, like I said, the furthest object away. So I'm going to move that backwards in space. What this does is it does make it so it scales down a little bit because it's further away from us. So all we have to do is rescale that right back up just a little bit. Now this will mean we'll have to scale some other things a little bit. So just be aware of your proportions. I next know that my woman standing is also further back from our woman sitting at the table and that table and the bag. So I'm going to move her just a little bit back in space. Again, I'm going to have to scale her up just a little bit to compensate. I think our woman is actually the nice middle ground. I don't think I need to move her forward or backward in space, but I do know I need to move the bag and the candle forward because they're a little bit ahead of her. And then I might need to scale them down just a hair. So we just want to make sure that her arm is realigned back with her body and that this bag with shift. So you just click the little edges here and hold down shift. Now this is a very touchy, I will say, kind of system with this little arrow here. Sometimes you'll think it's been selected, sometimes it's not. So it's just a very subtle touch and go little shift here. But what this will do is it'll make it so that we can see in physical space and get a little bit of that faked 3D in here. So now what we're going to do, or what we're going to do, I should say, is right click in here. This is our composition, remember? This is all the stuff that we can change inside of our composition. So you can see our composition settings are in here. We can directly change the 3D view from active camera to top, left, front, back, bottom. We can rename certain things. We can open up some graphics in here, but we can also create new items. So we can create a new text, a new solid color. This is very similar to that matte color in Premiere. We can create a light. So if we wanted to have a fake light in here on that candle, we could create a virtual light in here. But what we want to do right now is make a camera. So I'm just going to hit new camera. For this class, I would leave this at default. Unless you know exactly what kind of camera you're going to be using, your film size and angle and all that, I recommend just using the default. If you know what your preset would be, you can change it to that. But like I said, for this class, 50 millimeters is perfect. I'm going to hit OK. And you can see inside of this top view, we have a little camera. And when we push it in, you'll see we zoom in on the other side because our items are already in 3D space. We have those little 3D boxes checked next to them. We can automatically see them as they move through space. So you right click in here and go new camera. You can also come up here to file new or hold on, it's in a different spot than normal. Layer new camera. I swear it moves every class. Now what we also want to make is a null. So I'm going to go new, null object. What the null does is says, hey, I want to move this object, not my actual camera. I want my camera to be attached to my null. Null is kind of like an empty placeholder object. It's used in a lot of things here inside of After Effects. To kind of make it so it's a little easier to move things around. So again, I'm going to put my null into 3D space. So you can see my null is this kind of little empty box right here in the center. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this little, I call it Pilly Whip. It's called the Pick Whip or the Parent Whip. And I'm just going to click and drag that to my null. So now if I move my null, not my camera, wrong button. my camera moves. So I'll do that again real quick. I'm gonna delete my null. So we have our camera in here. I'm gonna right click, new, null object. I'm gonna make sure it's in 3D space. And then I'm gonna take this curly Q, pilly whip, parent whip, and I'm gonna click and drag it. So I get this kind of, it turns blue and I get this little line. And I'm gonna drag it to my null. And when I do that, if I move my null now, so if I go into my transform and on the position here, move this, it now moves my camera. Something else you can do is make sure all of your background layers and camera are locked. So the only thing you can move in here is your null. So if I click on this and move it in 3D space, we're no longer moving our camera, we're moving that null. This is just a safer option in case you need to change something about your camera. Maybe you need to change its focal length or anything like that. You're not keyframing the motion on it, you're only keyframing the motion on the null. Now, if you just keyframe the motion on the camera, nothing bad's gonna happen. You might get some weirdness at some point or something glitchy might happen. This just kind of keeps it nice and clean. So if you were to hand off this to somebody else, they'd say, hey, there's a null there. This must be what we're using to move our camera. That way, if they need to change any of the camera settings or if they need to rotate the camera itself, you won't have to worry about rotating that null. You're just using the null for the motion. Questions about this? About the virtual camera in here? Okay. Last thing I'm going to tell y'all about is how on earth do y'all render, right? How on earth do we take this from being inside of After Effects to being a movie? There's two ways you can go about it. If you go File and Export, you'll see there's Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue or Add to Render Queue. There's also Export and to Premiere Pro. You can try this. Sometimes it works. I'm hoping maybe they got that fixed. I don't know for sure. But you can click that and it should, in theory, open up Premiere and then you can export it from Premiere, just like we did with our exercise 2. If that doesn't work, that's normal. So you can do one of the other two. So if you can add to Render Queue, what this does is it'll first be like, hey, I want to render this all here inside of After Effects. There's a couple of things you'll need to change. So under here we have render settings. If you click on that, this is just how do you want it to render? Do you want to render it with the best quality? Do you just need a draft or a wireframe or anything like that? Do you want the full resolution? You want half, third, or a custom? That sort of thing. Do you want to use the frame rate or do you want to use a custom frame rate? Pretty basic, just making sure it's working in the way that you want it to. Then we have your output mode. Currently it is set to AVI. If you notice, there is no H.264 MP4 here, which is the format that I only accept. Currently it's set to AVI. Do not turn an AVI into me. I will not grade it. AVIs are absolutely massive. If you think H.264s export really big, AVIs do like gigs, where MP4s do like bytes. So when you're in here, if you export it as an AVI or a Targa sequence or a JPEG sequence, you'll have to take it into Premiere and then change its format to something different. So you can export it as an AVI. Just make sure you're not turning that version in. You're taking it into Premiere and changing it to the H.264. I'll say for now, I'm going to do a JPEG. I'm going to say OK and OK. And then it'll ask you, where do you want to output this to? What do you want to name it? So you could call this like example, tell it save. It would go to my documents folder or wherever else I need to put it. And then all you have to do is hit render. It does take a little bit of time. If you do an AVI, it'll just kind of slowly turn this empty kind of gray, dark gray bar right here blue slowly over time. And then when it's all the way done, you're done. Now, the way I personally prefer, I think it's a little faster. It takes about the same amount of time to export you just skip a step so you don't actually have to take it into Premiere. Is I'll click on, also again, just like with Premiere, you want to make sure that your composition is what you're exporting. If you have this render queue turned on, you'll accidentally export the render queue and then nothing will happen. So make sure that your composition is selected and highlighted blue. And then all you do is go File, Export, Media Encoder Queue. Now what the Media Encoder Queue does is, I showed it to you guys a little bit, or I told you about it a little bit the other day. It's a separate program inside of Adobe that Adobe has built in that works really well for if you're going to be exporting a lot of different things, or if there's a certain file format inside of that you need that's not inside of After Effects. Now it does sometimes take a little bit of time to boot up, so it's currently booting up on my computer. And when it's ready, it'll look something like this. So it's its own program. Currently, it does take a little bit of time for that queue to boot up. So you can see currently over here in my queue, nothing's popped up. It does take it a minute to kind of register what you're taking your program from and what you're going to be exporting. So give it just a few minutes. If nothing ever pops up, you can manually search for it. So you can see it's still searching for stuff down here. Things keep popping in and out. So we'll just give this a moment to queue. And there you go. See, now it automatically popped up that I am exporting my composition from this After Effects file here. And what we're going to do is if we click on this match source right here, this will bring up pretty much the exact same export window from Premiere. Eventually. Takes it a second. Thinking about it.
So it takes time to power up this?
Yeah, it just takes a minute to power up. But once it's done, you don't have to close it out if you're going to be doing multiple different compositions. You can export them all at the same time.
And with that, we can bring it in the inbound 264. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, once this pops up, I'll show you. Ooh, it's just a bit slow. There it goes. So now you can see it's brought up that exact same file folder thing for the export as what we did for Premiere. So from here, it's just the exact same. It should automatically default to H.264. You can also check it right here. It'll say AVI or QuickTime or H.264. You can also change its output name here, just like you could earlier. So I could say example AE, hit save. It'll save to that location. It'll save with that name. You can also use max render quality. If you're not going to have any audio, you can turn that off. It will export faster if you know you don't have audio. I'm not going to worry about that. And then all you have to do is hit OK. And it won't immediately render. It'll actually wait till you're ready. So if you're like, hey, no, there's a couple other things I needed to do inside my composition. So long as you save that composition before you hit this tiny little green play button, it'll automatically update. So all you have to do is hit play and it'll start encoding. So you can see it has a preview here. You can watch it. I highly recommend watching it for at least a minute to make sure it's running. If it's not running and it's black and it's already like turning that bar blue, I recommend canceling it with this little stop button right here. And it'll ask if you're sure. You can hit yes. And it'll kill this the rest of the way.
So if they hit the play button, and what do we check to make sure it's going?
Just down here at the bottom. So I'm going to reset this. Hit play. You just want to watch this little output preview down here at the very bottom, just to make sure it's moving. If nothing's happening, something might be looking at the wrong layer. If it's black, it might not have been exported properly. You just kind of want to watch it, and it shouldn't take too long for this project for it to go across. It also will tell you how long it'll take. So this says 2 minutes. I think for me, the longest one I've ever had was about 4 hours. It's because I was doing something very in-depth with a lot of layers. I think I had like 120 or something like that. Each of them had an effect layer. It's crazy. So if it does say it's going to take a long time, go get a snack, take a nap, come back, it'll be done. You can also queue as many of these as you want. So for instance, if you had to, for some reason, have more than one, you could queue them and just hit play at the same time, and they'll both be done at the same time. It'll export one, then it'll immediately export the next. Questions at all about exporting from After Effects or anything like that?
Basically, the top three work in different steps.
Yes, they're all the same. They're just slightly different. If you do the render queue, you'll have to take it to Premiere, which will then have to be exported from Premiere. Or you can take it to the encoder queue, which skips a step. Okay. So, project 2 is to create a still image animation. So I want you guys to go out and collect your own imagery, your own pictures. I want you to take some shots if you want to, and use it to create an animation. Keep in mind that there does need to be a foreground, middle ground, and background element. Don't use more than 2 for each animation. So if you have a picture of a dog and you have a picture of a cat, but you also want to have like a watermelon somewhere in there, just be aware that if it has to take too long to edit those pictures together, you still have to mask them to kind of get that same look of what I gave you in that After Effects painting one in Photoshop. So you still want to make your masks. You want them to be nice and clean. If your masks are fuzzy where they should be hard or vice versa, your animation might look a little weird. Now, I want you to create 2 still image animations. You'll see those in my examples. I am looking for 2. If you only give me 1, you get half points. The max you can get is 50% of your grade until you revise it. So just be aware. But if you want to do more than 2, if you get really gung-ho into it and you're like, I want to do like 10, go for it. I will not stop you, and it will only add to your grade. I do want you to make sure there is a theme to your project, whether it be politics, environment, puppies, sports, a product, that sort of thing. So long as it makes sense why you have the same, like you have more than one. You don't want to have like basketball and a kitten. They don't, how do those correlate? I don't know. You want to make sure I can understand and your viewer can understand how you put 1 and 2 together. So if you're going to do something like Monster Hunter, and you have a picture of Monster Hunter hunting something, and then one of the beasties, that makes sense. They're from the same game, etc. Please include text and graphics if you'd like. You can also include music and sound effects. I welcome those. And then once you've animated them, create a sequence and export it that's about 10 seconds long, but no longer than 60. Now what that means is you'll have 2 of those images all in one video. So when you export those, you can take them into Premiere if there are 2 separate ones, combine them together into one, or inside of After Effects, you can have them all in the same composition. However you think would be easiest for you is how I want you guys to do it. And then just render it out as a single clip. I want to see them at the same time in the same video, not as 2 separate ones. Again, I'm looking for that 1080p format. So long as you are creating your Photoshop in that 16 by 9 by 200 DPI, you'll be fine no matter what. This is on D2L. It should be under content, table of contents, write-ups, and then project 2 animated still. And then just like always, that H.264, and then make sure your name is on it, or who do I know who to grade. Now, when you turn this in, I would prefer it if you turn it in on D2L to use a Google Doc or a Google Drive download so that I can have a copy of this in case it's really fantastic and I want to show it to other students. All of the examples I'm going to show you are from prior students. So be aware that if I like your stuff a lot, other students will get to see it. I'll gush on you a little bit. I'll be like, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life. It goes into the folder. It happens. So try to give me those. If you have to give me a YouTube link because Google Drive is just not letting you send it, that's fine too. Just let me know. Or if you're going to be here inside a physical class, you can turn it in on the server and you won't have to worry about giving me a download link at all. I accept both formats. Questions so far about the project before I show you guys examples? And then let you go because time will be up. Okay, cool. Yes, so they need to be in one video.
I have a question.
Question?
Does it have to be, like,
Landscape?
landscape or can it be?
I would prefer it to be landscape. I have had a couple people get really creative with the portrait view. They had stuff going on the sides too to make it look neat. So I'm not opposed to it just being like straight up and down, but talk to me first about your idea.
I have a vague idea.
A vague idea? Okay.
Yeah, but it might look better if I do, but.
Okay. So let's look at some examples. I'm going to stop my share real quick and then reshare so that I can make sure you guys can hear my sound. There we go. Let's see, which one do I want to show first? Do.
Go a little bit further forward so we can check your chute. 100 feet fall, speed 729 and decelerating.
About there and down there, safely down.
New world record holder.
You can also do fun graphic stuff too. So it doesn't have to be like imagery. It could be stuff that you've drawn, things like that. Now, if you use something like a concept art or something like that, just make sure you credit it in your title.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you.
Pretty sure it did turn in the
If
whole.
I get drunk, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who gets drunk next to you. And if I heaver, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who's heavering to you.
So you can have some fun with it. But yeah, I just want to see a theme, and just make sure you have two. Any last questions? Anyone remote? Anyone in here about project 2? When it's due? Is that a good question?
According to this, it says October 5th.
Exactly. It's due October 5th. So every day till then is a lab day. So they aren't mandatory. I'm not going to be like, where is everyone at a certain point? So you do have about 2 weeks-ish to work on it. It's due before class. So make sure you got it turned in. If you're having problems turning it in, just let me know. I still give you guys about 5-ish minutes to get it turned in at the beginning. That being said, Fridays, I'm still going to be remoting in from home. So if you do have a question, just pop into Zoom. Otherwise, I will be in here physically. So if you guys do have a question, you're like, I really don't know how this works. I thought I did, I don't. Please come in and I'll walk you through steps to make sure that you've got it. Same with you guys remote. If you have a question, just remote in during class time, and I'll help you walk through some stuff as needed. Any last questions about project 2 at all? Anything about After Effects? Just in general. No offending material.
Okay.
If it offends someone, I'll flunk you. That being said, you know, people are people. Don't be a dick. That sort of thing. Don't be mean. Don't pick on people. That sort of thing. Have fun with it, but you know, within reason. You can throw some memes in there. I threw some memes up there for you to show you guys a little bit. If you're gonna do a full song, like if you get really like gung ho like that one dude did, I still have to see like 2 different backgrounds at the very least. So like have them like the salt and pepper shaker pop off and then hop back on, something like that. Regardless of if you do 3 minutes worth of stuff, I still have to see 2 different types of video. Like I said, could be just a different background, could be they change outfits, who knows? Maybe the lighting does something cool. Have fun with it. If you have an idea that you're like, hey, I don't know what I want to do, is this okay? Run it past me. I think I've only told someone no once, and that's just because they got too ambitious. So just like, you know, if you have an idea and you're like, I think it's going to be a little longer than 60 seconds by like half a minute, I'll be like, probably don't turn in that version, but still show it to me. I'll grade the longer one, but I have to show the 60 seconds and below version. And just remember, it has to be longer than 10 seconds. But if it's too long, let me know beforehand. Don't make it too short. That's all I have. Those of you remote, y'all can go. You can go back to sleep, get something to eat. Those of you here, y'all can leave, take a nap, do what you need. If you've got any questions, flag me down. Our class is over. If you got to run somewhere else, go quick. You're free. Bailey, I will not be calling attendance on lab days. Just the day we'll be turning it back in. You're good. Bye guys on remote. I'm ending our Zoom. Have a good day.